Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm doing another colored pencil tutorial today, and this time I'm going to show you how I drew this tulip with colored pencils. So typically I don't usually like to do flower drawings or anything like that, but I was kind of feeling like drawing a flower just because it's springtime, and I thought this would just be a really fun, relaxing tutorial where I could show you some tricks on how to get realistic work with colored pencils. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm using my Polychromos pencils for this tutorial, and you can use whatever colored pencil set you want. I'm starting off with my dark forest green color, and I'm adding where those shadows, the darkest shadows, are going to be later on. So I don't want to go in right away with a brown or black color for the shadows. It's better to slowly build up your shadows. I'm finding those shadowed areas, lightly filling them in, and making sure that I'm coloring all in the same direction, or the direction that the reference photos suggest. And also, just be careful not to accidentally create any hard lines. For realistic drawings, you want to have soft lines, so even when you're defining something like the end of this stem that I'm going to define, I kind of want to make sure that I have a soft line there and I don't accidentally outline things, because that will kind of hinder your drawing from looking realistic if you do that. Now, everything I'm doing so far is pretty basic. I have a lighter green color, and I'm kind of creating a gradient sometimes between the darker forest green color and the lighter green. And really that's all that I'm doing, is following the reference and figuring out where those lighter areas are and the darker areas. And when you start out with a drawing, it's best to slowly build up the shapes and the forms that way. So slowly this is looking a little bit more 3D and realistic, and I'm just going to keep building up those colors until I am happy with it. Tulips have such beautiful, interesting looking leaves, so that's one of the reasons I picked drawing a tulip for this. They're one of my favorite flowers. But anyway, as I go in and continue to build up that stem, some areas look like the line is a little bit hard, but I will go and soften it out so that it doesn't look too cartoon-like. And sometimes the shadows really help to define an area, so you don't really need to add a bunch of color around the edge of the stem all over, but you can have a shadow going on behind it, as I have going on to the left of the stem where the leaf is, and it kind of defines where the stem is supposed to be without you having to do very much work on the stem itself. You'll notice how long I'm going to take to do the stem and the leaves, because with a realistic drawing like a flower, if you spend all your time and hard work on the petals and the flower itself, and then you kind of skip and rush through the rest of it, it's going to show, and it's going to take away from the realism and the quality of your end result. So I like to start with the stem and the leaves, or whatever area that I might be tempted to rush through later, because if you start with that area, then you're more likely to actually take your time and do your best job on it. So for this leaf that's pointy on the left hand side, for the point area, I want the colored pencil to sort of fade out a little bit so it looks like it's coming to a point, but I don't want to define that point with a super hard line, because that'll also take away from the realism. So if you have an area that's very pointy, just make sure your pencil's sharp and lightly create that point so that it looks like it's sort of fading outward, rather than just creating a hard line to define that edge. So flowers and leaves tend to have a lot of folds and things like that, so you kind of just have to focus on where those areas are and build that up. I think with leaves and a stem, it's really easy to accidentally make it look more two-dimensional and cartoonish and kind of just stiff. So if you focus a lot on just the form and the natural shape of where the leaves are going and everything, then it's going to look a lot more organic, and that's kind of the look that you're going for. And sometimes it's hard because you want to just draw that shape and not really focus too much on all the details, but it's best to just follow the organic form of your reference photo. So now you can also see where the highlight of the stem is, and I'm not really adding very much color at all to that area, and that's okay because it's still going to end up looking defined. Now, of course, not all flowers have stems and leaves like this that are going to take super long to do because they're so big, but still you do want to spend a good amount of time working on those leaves and making sure that the realism will match the realism level that you end up doing with your flower. So the back side of this leaf is going to be really dark, so I am going in and adding some sepia on top of that dark green to really get that shadowed area, because contrast is always extremely important when you're doing artwork. You want to make sure that you get a really good amount of contrast. So in addition to having some very highlighted areas, I want to make sure I do have those shadowed areas as well. As I work on the top part of the stem, I'm continuing to have softer lines. I don't want to have hard defined lines, you have to remember that. And if you do get a little bit too hard of a line, then you can go in with an eraser and lift it up a little bit. I do go in a lot with a small eraser, like a stick eraser, and fix some mistakes, because sometimes you accidentally put some like pigment in an area you didn't want to, or you put too hard of a line, and it's okay, you can just go in and lift some of that pigment up with an eraser. So if you kind of get the gist of this stem and leaf area, you can go ahead and skip ahead to the flower petaled area. I did kind of slow this down quite a bit just so you could see more like the process that I am doing here. I really love these foresty green, natural green tones a lot. Like, I always love using tones like this. I think that they just come out so pretty. But anyway, I'm defining some shadows now. Make sure that your pencil is sharp when you do this. I'm working on the top part of the leaf, and the top part of the leaf is kind of dark, but I actually darkened it up too much the first time around, so I did have to go in with an eraser and lift up some of that pigment, but it turned out totally fine once I fixed that mistake. But yeah, I was spending a long time on this, making sure everything looked really nice before I went to move on to the actual flower. So now looking at all the edges that I have, most of them are very soft looking, and it doesn't look like anything too harsh. So that's kind of why I had to spend a lot of time on this area, just so that I could get that look. So the flower petals themselves are each very different from each other. So I had the sketch in, and the sketch I kind of just wanted to draw in where some of those petals folded and things like that, and I think as long as you have that in your sketch, you should be fine. But some of the areas have lines that are going kind of like horizontally, those little curved lines that I did at the top, and those were details that I wanted to make sure that I included. I used a couple shades of pink just based on my reference photo, so you really don't need a ton of colors. But I also used a cream color because some of the areas had a little bit of a hint of a dull like yellow tone, so I thought the cream color would be perfect for that. I'm gonna work like piece by piece on the petals because I don't want to get myself confused since they're going in all sorts of different directions. So each petal has some areas that have details, some areas that have shadows and highlights. So that's what I'm focusing on. And the area I'm working on now has some details that are kind of like lines going in a specific direction. So that's what I'm focusing on, is creating those lines. So again, to start, this doesn't really look exactly like a petal. It kind of just looks like a weird form. But there's an area at the top where the petal kind of folds a little bit, and I think you also need to pay attention to those little details like that. So I went ahead and worked a little bit on that area where the petal folds and the area where there's a little bit of a point at the very top. And I think some of those little things really end up making the piece come together in the end. Now some of the colors, there's like a dark pink magenta almost color, like almost reddish, and then more of a peach pink color and a brighter pink color. So there really is a lot of variety of color going on, and that is what I saw in my reference photo as well. So sometimes some of the colors might seem like they don't like go together very well, or you're not really sure if you should be using more colors, but I think as long as you see the color in the reference photo, if you add that color into your drawing as well, I think it's totally fine, and you don't have to just stick with like a dark color and a light color. Now if you don't have a ton of colors and you only have that darker reddish color and pink color, you can make that work as well, just because colored pencils are so blendable. Also, it's annoying me, but my hair keeps coming into the frame and like being annoying and distracting, so sorry about that. That's my hair, if you wondered if there was something weird going on there. So kind of like with the leaves, you want to focus a lot on direction and things like that. So that's really what I'm paying attention to, and that's why I kind of went petal by petal and working on this a little piece at a time so that I can focus on what direction everything's going in before I move on to the next petal. So this petal that I'm working on that folds a little bit, it's really coming together now that I've created those folds on the outside, and I left some of that area a little bit white because that's what it looked like in the photo. Now you can really see that it looks a little bit more like a petal, and the area underneath it was quite shadowed, so I went in and started adding some shadows underneath there. And again, just as another reminder, following the shapes that you see and the forms that you see is really a great way to combat against accidentally creating like a flat looking flower, because that's the thing we're trying to avoid the most, is creating a flower that looks too flat, not realistic, since we are going for a realistic style in this. Now I did add a couple more details to the bottom of the stem and made sure that there was a nice transition from the stem up into the flower petals. Since again, it's not a hard line, the transition is a little bit more soft. By the way, you guys, if you're interested in seeing more of like a real time, so a little bit more of a slowed down tutorial where I go more step by step, go through the basics of how I'm doing everything. I am planning on making a Skillshare class for this tulip tutorial that I did. So I think I'm going to work on that, and if any of you do have Skillshare, once it's finished, I will definitely link it down below in case you're interested in more of a real-time video. Now I'm still going in and adding more details to that petal, that middle petal, before I move on to the 2 right petals. And even the smallest details help the drawing come together. So even just sharpening your pencil and creating a few lines like I did at the top, that kind of just helps things come together. And I really think it's all about the little details that really help your drawing look more realistic in the end result. But speaking of details, like these petals are so detailed when you look closely. Like they have so many little weird details that go in different directions and things like that, and shadows and highlights. So I was really just trying to study that, pay attention to that, and I think it's so much fun to do this in color rather than just always like in graphite with flower studies, because there are so many colors going on and it's just so beautiful in the end result, I think. But some of these petals towards the right side I'm working on right now have a little bit more of like an intense shadow on one side, and I was trying to leave some areas for highlight. And then of course I will go in and start working on my last flower petal to the right. I do like to work sometimes left to right with things like this because I am right-handed, and also so that you guys can see what I'm doing so my hand isn't covering my drawing. But sometimes if you work from one side to the other side, it helps you to keep more like organized or order, or you make sure that you don't lose where you're drawing, rather than if you were just kind of coloring in all different spots at once. But yeah, the last petal folds in a different way as well, so I'm making sure to create that fold and create those shadows underneath, and it also has a little highlighted area that I'm going to leave as well, and some more line details just like the other ones, so careful to add all of those. And I just think that the pink and red colors in this particular tulip are so pretty as well. Like I have also done a more orange yellowish tulip, but I think that the dark pink and peach colors go together really well too. So I do want to mention one last thing. When I am getting some of these really small highlighted areas, like for example where the leaf folds in the middle part of the big leaf, you can see that there's a little bit of a white line above it, a little highlight, and on the flower petals some of the areas have a light highlighted area too. So I do use my stick eraser. It's a Tombow Mono Zero eraser I talk about in most of my videos, and I think it really does make a difference when you can get those really precise highlights. So just to summarize it, the most important things that I talked about in this video: first of all, make sure you don't have any hard defined edges because you want your edges to be soft and not like cartoonish. Second of all, make sure you focus on forms and like shadows and highlights so that you don't end up having like a stiff, non-natural looking stem or leaf or petal. And third of all, really pay attention just to one section of the picture at a time so you don't get overwhelmed and you don't lose what's going on, because if I were working all over the flower to begin with, I might have lost some of those areas that I had sketched in, and I might not really know like where I am at. So it's important to make sure that you don't lose any detail in the process of coloring. Oh, and of course make sure you don't rush any particular area of your drawing, and you want to give equal amounts of attention to every area so that your end result is equal and you can get the best possible result and it doesn't look like you rushed through any section. Alright, so now that I have it summarized, yeah, that's all that I have for the video, guys. So I really hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment below and let me know what you thought of this video. I will probably have that Skillshare video up pretty soon, and I'll link it below in case you're interested in that as well. Hope that you guys were able to pick up some new like techniques and tips from this video. And I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching again. Bye guys!